All right, welcome back to PAFOW Live. I'm very excited to talk with Phil Willburn of Workday and Diana Fischer of Workday, and she holds this awesome title of Employee Life, and they're going to talk about Workday strategy on returning to the office. And obviously, this is a fluid situation in our world, and I know you all have done some innovative things to understand the employee experience and how best to meet the needs of your workers. So if you would, Diana, let's start with you. Introduce yourself a little bit and what your role there at Workday is.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Diana Fischer. I am Senior Director of Employee Life. That means a lot of different things, lots of different employee experience initiatives, but most conversation, I have been leading a cross-functional COVID response team since the start of the pandemic with people from all across Workday focused on how to support employees during this time.
All right. And Phil, you and I have done this a number of times now, and I'm really excited you're back because you now are leading people analytics there at Workday. In fact, I've been doing it for a few years on now, and I celebrate your work certainly. So if you would introduce yourself a bit and what you have done there to drive this understanding of the employee experience and how you all are going to come back to work.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And thank you for inviting me back. I keep wondering after every session, it's like, is Al still frustrated with me, or am I going to get an invitation back? So
Absolutely not.
We got
no frustration at all.
Yeah. So, I lead up people analytics at Workday for the last few years. And really, my role and as many roles, and as you know, Al, as you talk to them, is to oversee insights about our people to drive action. And it's been a real honor and pleasure to be working with Diana over the last year and a half, because analytics is only one part of the story. You actually have to partner with the people who are on the ground, who are taking actions, who are living it day to day. And this partnership with Diana has been an amazing journey for us. And we're just excited to be here to share some of our insights and findings over the last year and a half.
All right. Well, outstanding. We'll have a discussion on what you present in 20 minutes or so. In the meantime, I'll get out of your way and give you to the floor. So have at it. Enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Al. Yeah, happy to be here. And Diana, I'm so glad that I was able to rope you in to this. You're probably wondering, Phil, why are you doing this? But it's important and a critical part of the story. And we're excited to share a little bit of our journey here. And what I mean by our journey is really this connection between insights and actions. And that's how I see this partnership, Diana, is really, we started with this idea of like, how do we understand our employee population? How do we understand what's going on in this situation? And then how do we take action from that? And from the very beginning, I mean, you've been able to partner to kind of have this, I would say, virtuous cycle of insights, action, insights, action. And I'm excited to share a little bit of this today. And I honestly believe that, sharing our kind of return to work journey, as we would say, it's only one side if it's just me sharing the analytics piece, because it's a deep partnership. So I just want to, we introduce ourselves, pumped to be here again. And maybe you could spend a couple minutes framing up, how we think about it and kind of what we're here sharing today, Diana.
Yeah, sure. So I am equally excited to be here. I know you think you roped me into this, but I'm actually pretty excited to have this conversation. And it really, truly has been a partnership. I don't think we would be where we are in our response without the hard work of your team. So kudos to them. The slide you guys see on the screen frames up how we're thinking about our return experience. So it really serves two purposes. Number one, it's how we've structured our presentation today. But number two, it shows the phases we expect to be moving through as we begin our reopening process. So of course, right now we're in the remote phase in the vast majority of locations for Workday around the world. This is where most of our workforce, outside of a handful of critical or essential on-site roles, everybody's at home. During the transition phase, we expect to have a broader return to our offices. So this is the beginning of the journey back to full capacity. And then full return is pretty far out in the future, but when we would expect essentially the vast majority of employees are back, they're using the office more normally, and kind of the threat of COVID is behind us. So 3 main phases. We're going to talk through each of these, including the data we've gathered and how that has informed our decisions. And I totally agree. It has been very rapidly evolving. I think we thought at the beginning, wow, this is going to change quickly, but it really just kind of kept changing. Like nothing is constant in COVID. So as soon as you solve one problem, something else pops up. And whether that's from outside or external pressures, insights from the scientific community, even things like employees reaching new levels of burnout or fatigue and just seeing that change over time. We've really seen these ebbs and flows of pressures on our workforce. And of course, that changes our response. So no surprise there, this work is a strong partnership between you and I and your full team. And we've been making these data-informed decisions. So I think we should dive in. And let's start in the remote phase. Again, this is where the vast majority of our workforce is at home. We've really been focused on employee safety, like every company since the start of the pandemic, and very specifically supporting our employees' needs in general, especially around productivity and well-being. Those were two just main drivers of our response from day one. And the reason why is we knew if we helped our employees be successful and helped our employees cope in this uncertain world, that they would help our customers and partners do the same. So why don't we turn it back to you, Phil, and you can tell us a bit more about the remote phase.
Yeah, thanks. And we're talking about it as if it's over when it's still ongoing a bit. Even though we're thinking about transitions, but we didn't know when we started that this was. We were like, okay, in a few weeks we'll be back, or in a month we'll be back, and it hasn't been true. And one of the things that was surprising to me as we start to unpack this data, and I'll share a little bit of data with everyone, is how resilient and how quickly our employees were able to pivot in this. 99% of all of our employees are now working fully from home. And we're a very, I would say, you can correct me, Diana, we're a very office-based culture. We like the get-togethers. We have a lot of fun events. We have so many things, so many clubs and activities and everything. And it was a big surprise. And there was a number of concerns like, how are employees going to handle this, well-being, burnout, and we looked at this. But then are employees able to continue to get work done, right? And one of the things that I thought was surprising and really interesting is how well our people leaders trusted our employees to do the work. Because I think trust really is that kind of mechanism that allows, like, hey, your life's crazy. You've just changed everything about it, but I trust that you can jump in and go through it and get the work done. And when we have 96% of all of our people leaders saying, yes, I fully trust my employees to get the work done, and employees feeling super positive about being able to make contributions, we could see, as in other companies did experience this as well, that productivity and trust really allowed us to pivot and allowed us to kind of continue to make progress as we made it through this time period. And that was important for all sorts of things. And we continue to balance this idea of, do you have what you need for office equipment? We did pay everybody twice, which was, a thing to help people get through the initial phase. We took another number of actions so that we can keep focused on this, but we had to balance it with, are you taking time off? Are you taking care of yourself? So forth like that. And we've been continued to have this high level of kind of, I would say, productivity and a balance of well-being and burnout along the journey. When we think about the real impact of the remote phase, I think it's best summed up, and there's been some external research on this, is employees' connections with their colleagues. And we found out employees can still be productive. In fact, some employees say they're more productive like this. But when we looked at the overall impact of it, and I'll just share some data right here. Maybe some data. Yep, I'll go back here. I'm going to share this data and then I'll go back here. When we looked at the impact of kind of the remote phase, 50% of employees are saying, hey, I feel less connected to my colleagues since COVID began, since we've been working remote. And that's really key, because when we think about the future, the transition, the full return, so forth like that, people will be returning, employees will be returning for connections and community. Productivity, sure, but a lot for connections and community, and we have to foster those connections and communities. And that's what our employees really want. We see this clearly in the data. Now, I'm talking from a people analytics perspective and saying, well, of course you're getting this data, you're seeing it, you're seeing trends, you're sharing it with Diana. But the real power for us was, we didn't just take this data, Diana, and we worked on constant set of questions and insights and interviews and stuff like that. We took this data and distributed it to the fringes of the organization, so that every single leader at Workday, through our technology, had access in insights to not only kind of their team, but had an overall view of their entire organization to say whether or not the organization's trending up in my geographic location with this specific set of individuals. And this really supported the, what I would say, troubleshooting and looking for hot heat areas in the organization where there's some more struggle than others. And we use this as a way, and we stood this up in super speed. We had, we had this idea of, hey, we need to pivot some questions because we have a pulse survey to more pandemic COVID related. And within a week, we pivoted those questions and have a new product in the hands of our leaders so they can actually take actions. And we also did this early on with employee demand trends. So we knew that these insights were critical, knowing where our workplace is. But this is, as you know, you probably know better than me, Diana, that different geographies really handle this very different. At first, regions of APJ were hit hard, and then back down, and then us here in the US were hit hard. And so what we were able to do and to monitor from things like requests, health attestation, badging data, so forth like that, were people who wanting to come back into the office for various cases. And that was important for us to be flexible and be kind of keep our eye focused on our employees throughout this phase. And so these were some of the kind of key deep insights where we learn about our employees and then really pivoted our strategies to focus on them during this remote phase. And so I kind of say all this to summarize that we're still in the remote phase, but we have actually really good insights, really good distributed dashboards, really good specific actions, and people have adapted here, and now they're getting excited and wanting to focus on what is the future. And so this is where I think a lot of our effort has been focused on over the last quarter and a half, maybe longer, is like, what does a transition look like as ease of restrictions look like? So maybe Diana, from kind of the insights we learned from the remote phase, and feel free to comment or correct anything I said as you usually do on that. Thinking about the remote phase and now the transition phase, how are we thinking about that and how we're kind of setting that up with our employees?
Yeah, first to comment on the remote, I would not correct anything. I think that was an excellent overview. I will reinforce that sometimes the data that your team delivered gave us an advanced look. We're like, we didn't even see that coming, and yet here we have some insight that tells us we need to spend some time here, and we were able to get ahead of it. 50% of the time, that wasn't even the case. We would see something and then we're like, oh my gosh, this is an issue. Let's go ask employees about it. Let's devise a solution. So it's an interesting challenge because sometimes you're like, you have a hunch, you're ahead of the data. Sometimes you're behind the data, and you've really got to balance that and just go through that cycle and make sure you're spending time and energy on the right things in a situation that truly does change day to day, hour to hour. I mean, I just laugh looking back because we really were talking about how many weeks we would spend at home and like, how are we going to get through the 4 weeks of remote work, and here we are more than a year later, still in remote phase. But the good news is we're approaching transition. We're getting there. Not everywhere. I know there's places, and especially if we have international outside of the US viewers, not everywhere even feels like this is close because of the way vaccines are being delivered. And so for some, there's a chunk of time left in the remote phase until access to vaccines accelerates. And then for others, specifically the US, and then in APJ, where the vaccine rates are maybe not that high, but the management of the disease has been so good that they're experiencing a more normal day-to-day experience. We're thinking about this transition. We're thinking about what it means to start to get back to the office. So let me talk a little about that. In general, this is where we are leaving the emergency phase of the pandemic, and the specific measures of that and the definition of that is a hot topic these days among people I'm connected to on the COVID response front and the scientific community. So just in general, this is where the risk is starting to lower to a point that we want to welcome large numbers of our employees back. And we've been really intentional at Workdays designing this as a ramp up period. It's not a light switch on and off where one day you're at home and the next day you're back full time. I mean, we have been apart for so long and gone through so much, both individually and then as a company together. We cannot ask people to come back on one day and expect that we're just going to snap our fingers and everything will be good to go. And in recognition of that, and truly a large part of that understanding came from us sifting through employee comments and doing focus groups and hearing from leaders on the ground in different parts of the world, and then assembling all of those different sources of information and realizing this transition period needs to be customized to the individual employee and have a lot of flexibility from a company standpoint. So if you go to the next slide, we have been thinking through the questions that 1,000 questions that we're hearing from employees. And for those of you that are listening and might be thinking about heading back to an office soon, you probably have those same questions and your own version of the questions, like, is it going to be safe? What are the vaccination requirements going to be? Am I going to be wearing a mask? Will my employer be understanding of my childcare needs or my elder care needs? We all have these things racing through our heads because our journey back to being in the office on a more normal schedule is highly personal. So as my team started thinking through this, now, we began this process many months ago, but as we're still watching things change, seeming every single day, it seems like something new happens. We're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of every employee and ask ourselves, what are they going to need during this transition period that will make their return a successful one? So let's go to the next slide and look at some of these big concerns. So it's probably not a surprise that safety and specifically the risk of catching or spreading COVID is a big concern. Not a surprise to me, probably not a surprise to anyone on the call. But as you start going down the list, you see how many different things people are worried about. We have folks who've never been to an office because they're a new hire and they don't know what to expect. Like, how weird is it to have your first day in the physical space a year after you met these colleagues? Like, that is just a very unexpected thing that we need to plan for. We need to help folks. Even things, and I'll give the example of, like, I've read a lot of articles about this, it seems so silly, but like relearning the small talk. I mean, office small talk is like a very specific brand of small talk, and we haven't practiced that. We practiced it in a Zoom setting for a little while, but what about your 30 seconds in the elevator? And I'll give an example my team is thinking about. What if you get caught in the elevator and you forget what a good 30-second question is to talk to that person you haven't seen? And by the way, you've both been in a pandemic, having a crazy experience the last time you saw each other. We're thinking about, do we put a little decal in the elevator that like gives you a question prompt just so that you're like, oh, I remember I can ask a quick question and, ease that moment. It seems so silly, but these are the kinds of transition concerns that we're seeing from the data and trying to plan now because, we're getting closer. And if we are going to print out decals and put them in elevators, we gotta start on that. So Phil, your team's insights have been really helpful. And how I'll summarize this is, some things are very big and some things are very obvious, like how do we keep people safe? We spend by far and away the most amount of our time as a cross-functional team is on safety, of course. But all of those other things will impact the experience sooner or later, those small things. And so not only are we looking for these big items, these can't miss items, but we're sifting through the comments. We're listening to feedback from specific offices that are further ahead in their reopening. We're trying to catch the outliers so that every employee, no matter who they are, we want their experience to be a good one. Even if your need is only shared with 1% of the population, to me, it's still critical we think about those outlier reasons because that's how we will make the experience a good one for everyone, not just for the people who share the most common concerns. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here's something that's been super interesting. There are so many questions that employees have that we simply do not have the answers to right now. The data can't tell us. The scientific community is still gathering the data to let us know, what our policies are going to be on certain things. And so we recognize that all of those questions that everyone wants to know right now, we literally can't answer some of them. So instead, we've been intentional about talking to employees about some non-negotiables during the transition period. So first and foremost, safety is the number one priority. That's an obvious one. You saw, the vast majority of respondents on the last slide said that safety was their top concern. It's our top concern too. The second one is that we are committed to that experience being a good one, just like I shared. And so we've said to employees like, hey, even if we can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like when you step foot or what that date is going to be in your city with your, particular safety restrictions, we're super, super committed in a non-negotiable way to making that experience a good one. So important to call that out. And if we go to the next slide, there's one other thing that we've been talking with employees about that I think is worth spending some time on. And it's about how different employees have these different needs, and they probably need different return plans. That's okay, that's expected, that's something Workday supports. And so there's a lot of different needs, and I'm sure those of you who might be working on this at your own company, these resonate, and you can think of examples that impact your own workforce. But thinking of our caregivers, we've heard from our caregiver community that one of the things that's concerning is like, what if I go back into a routine, a situation, a daycare situation, a school situation, and it isn't right, and suddenly I have to take my kid back home with me for a week. Like, what if I go back for 2 weeks and then I need to be home with my child for a week because I want to change things, I wasn't happy? That's fine, that's okay. So we're starting to talk about those unique circumstances, and maybe someone who's moved away and knows that they need to come back near one of our major hubs, but have you looked at the housing market recently? It's crazy. So that person might need more time, and that's okay too. When you can't answer the question for every individual employee from a policy standpoint, it's really important to talk about the philosophy behind the decision and what will guide your decision when that day comes. That's what we're doing in terms of all of our return policy, our return timing. That's what you see on the screen with these transition examples. And I think it has brought some comfort to employees who are on this journey with us as we try and define the specifics of our return plan. So I'm going to turn it back to Phil just in one moment, but my closing thought here is that we have done a lot of messaging to employees about these different factors, and the reality is behind the scenes, trying to coordinate this effort for a global company with offices all over the world with thousands of employees, it's super complicated, and the team that's running that needs good visibility across these different changing circumstances so that we can move. When we went home, it was a global decision. We all went home at once. Great news. That's really easy from a planning standpoint. That's one email to everyone. But guess what? Reopening dozens of offices when everyone has a different safety requirement and protocols, and some are open to early returners and others aren't. This is where it starts to get just very complicated. And I think Workday, the tool, has been really helping us manage that process using the data to power those decisions. So I'll turn it back to you, Phil.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think you articulated so clearly. A decision for everybody to go home, that was easy. A decision to flexibly allow people to return to some regular work in which they may see some colleagues, that is super hard. And I love the focus of your team on philosophy and keeping the employee at the center. That's really what the values are. And when you take that philosophy and you say, we don't know every edge case, we don't know every possible scenario, but here's our philosophy. It allows the freedom of people leaders, of managers, and senior leaders to make decisions that are best for their employees, which is what we all want. And we do see in the data though, and I know because me and you've had conversations, employees actually do want to come back. They want to come back to connect with each other. They want to come back for a sense of community. So it's not like we're getting this, I'm not sure about returning to the office. Yes, they feel that way from health and safety, but they are dying to have the awkward, small, maybe not awkward conversation in the elevator. Diana, I'm not sure. I'm looking forward to that. But just seeing colleagues again and hey, can I get a quick connect, or can I whiteboard with you, or we're solving these problems? Or, even in the research, we've seen that people's professional networks have shrunken during the pandemic, right? So their core professional networks, their key connections actually have decreased. And so people are experiencing a little bit more isolation, more loneliness because of that decrease. And so this allowing to come back into some environments where you do have connections is really critical. And you did point out that we're using Workday to really take a look at this. And we've been focusing on site status trends, and we have a great dashboard, which we're happy that we worked with you to configure to give you insights for you guys to use, where we blend all sorts of data. We have employee sentiment data, we have geographic location data, we have new hire data, we have badging data, all together in one central framework, so that you can say, like, as we open the offices, what is the usage? What is the sentiment? What are their concerns? So forth like that. And with the power of like Prism Analytics and bringing some additional external data, it's really allowed us to set the team up very well to make these decisions ongoing, right? Because let's say, there is a demand in a particular office because they're just, they need to get out of the house or something like that. We're able to see that demand, and you're able to pivot the resources and so forth like that. So I think as we think about, our transition phase, which, who knows how long this is going to be, to the kind of full remote, this idea of keeping a pulse on every location and what every employee's kind of preferences are, sentiment are, so forth like that, is going to allow that flexible and agile decision making that has been critical and so important for Workday, the company, along this journey. And Diana, I appreciate all the work you do, but I don't envy the work that you do. That's what I would say. I'm glad that we're partnered in this journey. Now that we think about full return, let's pivot and talk about full return. And this may be, we're kind of still in the remote. Now we're thinking about transition and looking at where people fit and what does it mean to transition to some level of seeing each other again. As we think about the full remote, I think this is where a lot of people are saying, is this the hybrid workforce, or is this the new future of work model? A lot of people are saying these words. And for us, we're trying to say, hey, what does it look like eventually when more people want to come in, are interacting with each other? What kind of guidelines, or even what kind of data can we use to help put together our principles on this in the future? And we actually have some really good data that we've kind of brought together and our teams have collaborated on to kind of theorize what the full return might actually look like. And I'm going to share just a couple points. And you've seen this, Diana, but it's cool to take a look at this. When we think, what is a future flexible work schedule? That was a big conversation. And guess what? We look at the data and we look at the extent to which people are coming to the office, how often they're coming in, whatever locations. We came to the conclusion we were already flexible pre-pandemic, right? People chose the days they want to come in the office. They were coming in 3 or 4 days in the office. They were already contributing to this flexibility. So when we think about this full kind of, this full return or something like that, and we focus on flexibility, we were already flexible. And that was, I think, super helpful for us to collaborate on and show and point out with our leadership team to say we were flexible. So what are we transitioning to? We're transitioning to a flexible as we were in the past. So I think that's cool as you look at to look at this data and then kind of make some decisions on that. And then just to nuance this data, and of course I know I had to sneak this slide in to geek out on some of this. When we look at people who are coming to the office, guess what? It's our early career professionals, our younger workmates who really want to be in the office to create that sense of community. And we looked at that across our data. We did see that, hey, and we look at our data now, those people want to come in to create community, the first careers, or the new hires, or the interns, or so forth like that. And even the later careers, the people did want to come in to create community. I think that's the power of that data that we're seeing in integrating this data into the site status and understanding what it means for each location was really critical for us to thinking about the future of work. So that's kind of the data that's, I would say, some of the data that's informing us about what the future looks like. Why don't you walk us through, Diana, as you're thinking about what is this idea of personas, and what is that idea of kind of future of work when it comes to that?
Yeah, so those were 2 great examples of the many examples. I mean, I think the slide deck from your team was like 40 slides long with all the different ways we were looking at office use patterns. And it was fascinating, right, to say what was happening before COVID and what could that tell us about how we might envision the future, knowing that all of these changes around us were at play. And most people that I talk to at different companies that are working on this are imagining their workforce in terms of different personas, right? We've all concluded that depending on the nature of your role and the expectations, you might use the office in a certain way in terms of frequency or time spent in the office. And Workday's no different. We're talking about that in the same way. And while every company is different, you might generally have people who need to use the office every day because, let's take the example of physical security on site. You can't really do that remotely, right? You need to be there. So that might be someone who's always in the office. And then a lot of workers, particularly in the tech industry, might fall in kind of a mostly category. So you're mostly in the office, but you're also at home sometimes, and you can be effective in both locations. And then for sometimes folks who have workforces that are on the road, are out meeting with clients, and maybe are not in their core employer's office, but because they're visiting other companies, prospects, clients, partners, whatever, maybe they're in a sometimes in the office type of a role. And then rarely, we have, like all companies, there are people who work from home full time, and those folks are not expected to be in the office full time. So whatever your personas are for your company, you might see different versions of this based on the work that you do. We think it's really important to talk with employees about this. And for those that follow the headlines, you've seen some blockbuster announcements from different companies as they reach more certainty for their own employees. And it's definitely something that is discussed regularly and of interest, I think, because employees want certainty. They want to know, can they move further away, and how much time do they need to be in the office? And these are all real life decisions that affect someone's everyday experience, not to mention their ability to perform well in role. So that certainty is important. And even though these personas were still many months away from kind of this magic post-COVID where we're all high-fiving and, don't have masks and standing 6 feet away from everyone. I can't wait for that day. We're still a little ways from that, but it's coming, and people are making decisions that impact how they plan their lives around that. So we've spent time on it. One other thing, and we'll go to the next slide to talk a bit about flexibility, because that's been really at the heart of this, is employees say, we want more flexibility. We've done really well during COVID. What does it mean when the office is open? How does flexibility play into it? And regardless of what your company decides for flexibility, I think it's good to not necessarily limit yourself to a days of the week split. Like, it's not always going to be 3 days at home and 2 days in the office, because that's not how work is typically done. Maybe it is in some specific industries, but you have a schedule with different demands, different meetings, different times when your 5 favorite friends are going to be in the office, which is a moment you definitely want to be there for. But then on the days when you have heads down work, you might want to be at home more. And it also is your personal situation. So do you want to arrive at the office slightly later so you can do drop off for your kids at school? Or, do you do your best work later in the day because you hate those 8 a.m. meetings, in which case, can you come in a little bit later and work a little bit later? Like, this whole concept of flexibility is evolving, as we think to the future and as we get closer. I think we're having these conversations more and more. But I do believe that it is not going to come down to necessarily a hard, like, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday schedule, or you're permitted 1 day a week at home, just because that was pre-COVID. That made sense then. And now it's really about at the heart of the work you're doing. How can you do your best in terms of performing in role, and how can you feel your best both at work and at home? Let's design the experience around that and make sure that everybody's needs are met. The needs of the employee, the needs of your team and their direct goals or things they're accountable for, and the needs of the business as a whole. So balancing those is going to be really important as we move forward. What's also going to be important is seeing how we're doing, progressing against this. And that is something I will look to your team, Phil, to advise on.
Yeah, it's, I think I was struck, Diana, by you're saying the flexibility pre-COVID is different than flexibility post-COVID. And I think about expectations. Expectations have fundamentally changed for the workforce and the work environment. And I even think for myself, my family and my 3 boys, like, they love eating lunch with me every single day, and seeing me at a breakfast time, and then we have a video game 15-minute break, and I have to go, I don't know, see a finger skateboard trick or something like that. My life has changed quite a bit in my family's life, and so all of these expectations roll into that. So I want flexibility in a way that it doesn't disrupt the family and the flow that we're in. And I think we're just going to see this over and over again, that the expectation of the future is different. And what's really important is different. And what's really important is for us, as we've always been doing, is focusing on key data, key sets of data that keeps the employee at the center of the conversation, and our leaders informed about what's going to enable them to be most productive, have the healthiest work styles, et cetera. And for that case, we're tracking 4 kind of buckets of data ongoing as we go through there. We are always going to be asking employees their current sentiment, their happiness, their well-being, their sense of connection, so forth like that. We're also going to be looking at, as our offices continue to will continue to open up, what is the office activity to monitor? What is the right setup? What is the right look? How are we getting the most usage? How are teams using it, et cetera? We're continuing to look at how do we ensure our workmates are being productive. And I shared this with Al in the last PAFOW presentation, but we did a really deep research and insights on Zoom analysis, where we looked at the extent to which our employees are using Zoom. We brought in with worker data from Prism, put in the Workday, do some analysis. And what we found is that there was like this magic number of the number of hours in which you started to feel the Zoom fatigue, and that specific organizational interventions actually reduced overall Zoom fatigue. So we're going to continue to look at ways to keep our employees productive and happy as they're interacting and collaborating with each other. And lastly, when we look at movement, where are employees thinking about? And what I mean by movement, I think about movement across the organization. What kind of gigs are they doing? What's the internal mobility? What kind of career decisions are they making now post-pandemic as they start to think about their growth? So these are the key kind of areas that we continue to move forward, and we'll move forward. And I assume we've made this, we kind of have our philosophy down, and I'm assuming as we learn more, we're gonna need to pivot and make different decisions. So lastly, and maybe I can give just like maybe a summary of the lessons, or maybe the tips for different organizations who are going through this, and I would love you to comment on this, Diana. But if we were going to, say what would be a great tips or something to be aware of as you're formulating your transition and maybe full return philosophy, is this idea of safety and positivity. We couldn't, I just think safety resonated so well with the employees right now. And this idea of when there's so many negative stuff coming in, how can we keep their safety at heart and remain positive? We're caring for you. We are trying to make things best decisions to support you where you're at, and making those decisions there. The second one is around data. We continue to put employees at the center, understand what they're doing, understand what the business need is, and then inform our leaders and make sure that people who need to make the decisions actually have access to the data, so that that data is distributed to the fringe. And so people leaders and senior leaders and managers and partners are making those decisions with well-informed data, not only with your team, but with all of our leaders here. And lastly, this is the idea of, if you can have a data-driven approach, you're able to be more agile. And what I experienced from your team, Diana, especially, is like, we've presented some early data, right? And then we presented some different data, and you're like, okay, we made this decision. Now we have to unmake this decision and make a different decision. And I like, geez, like, that's great that we can say data is actually driving the decisions and pushing us one way or the other. What are your thoughts as we close and start to think about bringing Alan here to ask some questions? What are your thoughts on these kind of 3 key points?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. First and foremost, I cannot think of another time where an employee is considering their decision to physically be present in the office as a risk to their health, right? Like a fundamental, will I be safe? Typically, physical safety is an assumed, just standard part of your experience of arriving to a place of employment. And that was broken at the start of COVID. And so we need to rebuild that trust that we're going to do everything we can to protect employees. And that positive experience, like, once we get the safety piece, that's foundational, right? And then everything above that takes it from like, yes, I'm basically safe, but let's make it an exceptional or a remarkable experience. People are having a decent time at home. I really love the example of your family lunch breaks, right? It's going to take a lot for me as an employee experience professional to convince you to leave that behind, right? hey, it's really awesome that, you got to save 2 hours of commuting time every day during the pandemic. Please go ahead and bring that back just so that you can be in the office. Like, that's not enough. So this whole idea of the positivity and kind of the employee value proposition is going to be huge. Data will absolutely inform that. And I think here it's really about understanding the needs of all workmates, not just the ones that are shared by the most people. And I mentioned that earlier. I think that will continue to be important, because what if we get 80% of our workforce back and happy, but we've made a decision that negatively impacts a subset? We need the data to help us understand that. And like all things in COVID, we would then need a plan to bring them along and make sure they're having an equally remarkable experience. So I think the data-driven piece is huge. And the agility explains itself. I mean, never have I ever on any project had so many like out of nowhere left turns, didn't see that coming. We're going here now, we're going there now. And I mean, that's just par for the course now. I think that will continue, but being guided by those overall principles of safety and a positive experience, we'll work our way through it. But yeah, there will be agility involved. I can say that with total confidence.
Yeah, as we've always been, and I'll stop and share here, and thanks for the insights, and Al will jump in magically and give us some questions. Before he jumps in, I just want to say thanks to Diana, because she's amazing, and I couldn't have a better partner for this. So,
right back at you.
Well, I will join in that love fest because I will say that I believe Workday is fortunate to have you two driving this. And I mean it sincerely, because as I was listening to you all, you're taking what I would call a very virtuous approach in humanizing this experience for your workmates there. I like that term as well. And it's also the case where you're not ignoring the need to be productive and get work done. So I do have a couple questions. Like, I mean, here's my notes. And the one question I want to start off with is, women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and the work experience. And that is, when you talk about personas, something I imagine you've looked at. And my question is this, and it's a little, maybe not the norm. It's when you talk about focus groups or doing surveys or what have you, there's an implication that the respondent is going to be vulnerable, is going to give you the right answer. Because I have heard anecdotally that, oh gosh, I don't want to share that I have 2 kids, 3 kids running in the background. I got to get my job done. I'm worried about my job. Therefore I have to put up a good front. I just got to keep motoring through. How confident are you that you got like authentic, good, healthy responses so you could respond appropriately?
Yeah, it's like you, Al, to jump right straight into it and headlong. The one thing that we have reemphasized over and over is, number one, we have strong confidentiality statements about how the data is used. So it's pretty clear. I think that's like a barrier entry. That's a hygiene factor. But I think one of the things that we've been able to do, Al, is share this data transparently back with the employees. We did show that underrepresented minorities and women were having a harder time during the pandemic. We saw this in the data. We shared it back for the employees. We say, we are hearing your voice. We are checking in, taking actions, and so forth. And so I think the data transparency to say, hey, not everything is rosy, and we're going to call out the non-rosy points, actually gives people trust and confidence to get back in there. The other thing I would say is just, and maybe Diana, you comment on this, it's a cultural thing. I'm sorry, but I often, I know it's my kids, but like I often see lots of my workmates who I collaborate with, I see their kids all the time. It's like, it's changed the dynamic. I don't feel like anybody's hiding their situation. In fact, like I like the word you said, Al, it's humanized us a lot more to understand our colleagues' situation. And I've seen that over and over play out at Workday. I don't know, Diana, do you have a idea or connection related to that?
Yeah, just a few reactions. One, we introduced a whole suite of caregiver support programs last summer, kind of when the peak, I feel like, of the crisis of schools not being open and how are we going to handle that. And, like many companies, we were very closely involved with our family's EDC and kind of the community that would advise us. And we even had caregivers speaking on our People Leader Town Hall. So if you don't have kids and you don't know what it's like to be a parent of a young child or any child in a pandemic, like if you don't know what that reality is, let's make sure you understand so you can lead with empathy. So that's one thing, normalizing it, making it something that regardless of your personal connection to it, it's something everyone needs to understand. The other thing I would say is if we have situations where we think someone may not be comfortable saying that they need a particular type of support because it would imply that they're not doing well or they're not being productive, we've been very intentional of having them having a way to access that support without going through their people leader. Of course, we want the people leader to be the first person. We're setting them up to be supportive and to have those conversations in a way that's sensitive and trusting and all of that. But there are some times where people just are more comfortable. And an example is where we had requests to return to the office as soon as possible because a home environment wasn't suitable. And that could be for caregiving responsibilities because you just don't feel productive at home. It could be for anything. It could be your Wi-Fi connection isn't great. We don't want someone who's not comfortable raising their hand to their manager and saying, I'm having a hard time being productive at home. That's why I need to go in. We designed a process where they could go direct to get that access without having to tell their people leaders first. And then we said, it's up to you if you share that. So I think it's just having that mindset as you look at the individual journeys people are having through the pandemic. And certainly caregiving is one that has stood out as an exceptional set of needs. But putting yourself in their shoes and saying, what would make this the most supportive it could be? What would remove barriers for someone who needs help but is afraid to ask for it? And how do we design a process that starts firmly in the perspective of the audience we're trying to support, as opposed to what might be easiest for the employer or most efficient from a process standpoint? I don't know if that makes sense.
For my 2 cents, it makes a world of sense. And I am, I'll echo what I said earlier. I mean, it's a very noble and thorough way to look at it. It honors the unique experiences of a diverse set of people, stage of life, ways of being, economically, on down the line. And that's tough to do from the, center, from a strategic, standpoint, which actually leads me into my next question. And I have time for a couple, and anybody who's participating has a question, please, by all means, enter it into the chat or the Q&A section. But it's really this, is that when we talk about return to the office or return to workplace, there are a lot of functions that are involved. Facilities, obviously, HR, IT, operations. So tell me what your governance looks like. You're taking these insights and you have to get people, all these groups on the same page. What does that look like in terms of the frequency in which you meet? Is it a meeting where we're all on the same call, or is it really point to point, just keeping key stakeholders involved ongoing? I mean, what does that look like?
Yes, I would be happy to take this. I have had the absolute privilege of making approximately 30 new best friends through the course of the pandemic that I talk to very frequently in the best way possible. And the reality is this is not one team running this, right? And no matter how many people need to be involved, the closer we are as that broader collective working on it, the better the experience is going to be for our employees, the better our business is going to do as a result. So in terms of a governance structure, we have what's called the COVID Tiger Team, and that is a cross-functional group. It has facilities, it has legal, it has safety, it has HRBPs and well-being professionals. So really just a very diverse set of perspectives. And then we have kind of they meet twice a week. They've been kind of how would I describe them? They are just the best group to work on something that is so constantly evolving, because they show up every day and they're like, what's the problem that we're going to solve this week? Okay, let's go tackle it. Who else needs to join this party? And it's been truly a very rewarding experience. Phil's team is part of that as well. We also have a kind of leadership board that's more senior leaders who are receiving recommendations from this planning group and considering them and providing feedback. So that group meets on an ongoing basis, and depending on the stage of the pandemic, sometimes it's been very frequently, sometimes it's been once a week. And we also have regional boards. So EMEA and APJ and North America, we have different regional advisors, and then down to the site level, we have leaders at each physical location. So a great example early on is like, we're looking at the stats for a particular office and we're like, hey, you guys look really good. You could open to a limited population. Here's the protections you need. It fits with our kind of global policy. And they're like, hey, I talked to everyone here and we're actually really good staying closed for a little bit. We'd rather give it a month. So a great example of how, as headquarters, we can tell you how you look on paper, how you look in Phil's dashboard more specifically. But it's really the local leadership. They're like, we want to give it a little more time. I want to host an all hands. I want to add this communication. So let's tailor whatever the coaching is coming from the central decision-making body to personalize it to those employees and what they need. And I think it's worked really well. And I think that's a model that'll live on after COVID, to be totally honest. There's like this cross-functional influence body, and it definitely needs to continue because it truly has been the thing that got us through.
Well, you anticipated my question because, do you feel this is going to be an ongoing governance body? You said yes. So thank you for that, because it's my hope that the world sees this as an opportunity to craft not only the work experience more consciously, but really craft how work gets done. Is it done by employees? Is it done by outsourced providers, contractors? Are there going to be AI type disruptions going to happen? So, staying with you, Diana, is that your, maybe aspiration or hope in terms of how this group evolves?
Yeah. And, I am firmly grounded in the perspective of the employee. That's my job, to think about the things that will make them do their best in their role and more broadly in their lives. Like we talk about well-being, which is part of what my team focuses on. I think that healthy employees will do better for their business, for their employer. And so it's our responsibility to think about all of the things that impact someone when they walk through the door. And that doesn't start at 9 and stop at 5, right? Mm-hmm. I think this cross-functional model, one of the things that drives me crazy is when an employee has a very simple need and like they can't solve it because it's some team that sits in some other work, like this information overload that impacts our employees is a real challenge. And to be able to reach employees with simplified messaging, with simplified ways to access resources, it's harder on the back end for people that work in different parts of HR or in legal or in safety or whatever. Like these teams don't always, maybe pre-pandemic, naturally have those super strong ties, but we had to in COVID. And what we've seen is that we can go to employees with a very crisp plan that considers all of those needs versus each team having to find a way to reach them. In terms of the different stakeholders in AI and those things, I don't know. I think, I don't have a firm perspective on that, but if we say this is the experience we're trying to create, these are the problems that our employees are facing, this is the needs of the business, think about all those things together and solve the problems that arise, and don't limit yourself to a particular team or your particular COE. I think that's going to naturally become so fluid because that's just the way work is happening. So I'm totally ready for that and excited.
Well, thank you for sharing. Phil, your thoughts on this, and then I'll give you both a chance for closing comments.
Yeah, I think all the things Diana says, yes, I'm supportive. However, Al, I think it takes a new type of leader, a new type of HR leader. What I've seen, Diana is, she's articulate, she's thoughtful, and she commands lots of respect and trust across the organization. She's really stepped up to be a new type of leader in HR that we haven't historically seen. Somebody, that just crosses all of the, HR, bureaucracy or teams in all of the things that touch employees and really focuses it. So what I would say is just like, it does, and I'm sure other organizations are facing this, but Diana's work on this is really a different way to lead HR function, and it's amazing, and I really think this is the future.
Well, yes, I absolutely couldn't agree more. I mean, Phil, you've been doing this for a while. And when I first started in this field 20 years ago, I was thinking, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do some research. We're going to shed light on what's happening, and the whole world is going to follow. They're just going to follow the data. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works, I've since discovered. And to your point, it does take someone to tell the stories, to craft the change, to harness a guiding coalition. And that's what I hear you have done, Diana. And I know, Phil, you're integral in bringing that insight to the fore. So I will say it yet again, congratulations to you two for doing what you do and how you do it. I think there's going to be a lot of beneficiaries moving forward, and I'm sure there have been historically. So closing comments as we start to wrap. Diana?
Closing comment, think about the long-term recovery now for your folks. Start planning for how you're going to measure it. I have no doubt that certain sites, particularly those with very strong social glue before COVID, will probably reemerge quickly, and they miss each other so much. And we can tell from the data, especially which offices are like, please open the doors, like I just want to see my coworkers, but other offices that maybe are more fluid historically or don't have as much stickiness between them, what are we going to do for them, and how are we going to make sure that those social connections come back? I believe social connections are the foundation of great work, and it's going to take a little bit of extra love to catch up some of our locations. So begin thinking about that and planning for it now.
All right. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, you said it, Al. You can't take insights and bottle it up and expect everybody to change their mind, right? It's really the partnership. So choose your partners also, because it really matters who you partner with and how the insights get out. And I would say keep doing the insights, but find the partners who are going to advocate, who are going to storytell, and who are going to take the very specific actions, and then be open to feedback when your insights aren't giving them what they need. Because Diana's told me plenty of times, Phil, that's interesting, but what I really need to know is this. And I was like, okay, we think we're brilliant, but you do know better than us. So take the feedback, and you'll have better insights, and you'll take better actions for your employees to really take care of them during this time.
Well, again, thank you both for being here. Thank you for sharing, all the best. And hopefully we can get together in person before too long. So you be well. See you soon.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.